Hi, welcome to the Silent Avenger channel. If you're enjoying the content, please consider giving it a like and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Let's dive into today's story. I'm Ronan. I'm a 38-year-old structural engineer in Denver. Life was good, or so I thought. I've been married to Cassidy for 8 years, and we had a life that, at least on the surface, looked perfect. Good careers, a nice house, and plans for the future. But it turns out, everything I thought I knew was built on lies. Our anniversary was last weekend. 8 years of marriage. Sounds like a milestone, right? Cassidy suggested a fancy dinner at this upscale restaurant downtown. It felt like a strange choice since we usually kept things low-key, but I went along with it. She dressed up more than usual, looking stunning in a way that made me proud, but also uneasy. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. During dinner, Cassidy was glued to her phone, something she rarely did. She'd glance at it, smile, then quickly tuck it away when she caught me looking. I joked, got a secret admirer, expecting her to laugh and call me silly. Instead, her face flushed, and she said, "It's just work stuff." Work stuff. Right. That night, after she fell asleep, curiosity got the best of me. I know snooping is wrong, but something about her behavior wouldn't let me rest. Her phone was locked, but she'd recently updated her smartwatch, which didn't have the same security. I scrolled through her messages and stumbled upon a name I didn't recognize, Blaine. The messages weren't just casual. They were filled with flirty comments, inside jokes, and plans to meet up. One message from her read, "I'll move the money over after the weekend. Once it's done, we're free." Free. The word hit me like a punch in the gut. I couldn't process it all at once. Was this just an affair? Was she stealing from me? And who the hell was Blaine? My mind raced, but I knew one thing. If this was true, she wasn't the woman I thought I'd married. I didn't confront her right away. Instead, I decided to find out everything I could before making my move. That night, I barely slept. My mind replayed those messages on a loop. Who was Blaine? What money was she talking about? And free from what? It was like my entire marriage had turned into some kind of crime scene. The next morning, Cassidy acted like nothing had happened. She kissed me goodbye before heading out to her yoga class, completely unaware of what I'd found. The second she was out the door, I dove into action. First, I went to her laptop. Cassidy was organized to a fault and used the same password for everything. It was easy to get in. I sifted through her emails, but they didn't show much. She was careful. Then I checked her banking app. That's when things started to fall apart. She'd been transferring money, small amounts at first, then larger ones, out of our joint savings and into an account I didn't recognize. Altogether, it added up to over $42,000. This wasn't pocket change. This was serious. Then I found the receipts. Blaine owned a gym a few miles from our house. She'd been wiring him money directly, paying for equipment, renovations, and even some kind of marketing campaign. She'd been funding his business behind my back. The worst part? Some of the payments had come from my personal savings account, the one I'd been building since college. I felt like a fool. By this point, I was shaking with anger. I wanted to call her, confront her, scream at her. But something told me to hold off. I needed to be smart about this. If Cassidy and Blaine thought they were pulling one over on me, I'd let them keep thinking that for now. Instead, I turned to Blaine. His gym had a website, so I started digging. It didn't take long to confirm he was the guy. His face was plastered all over the homepage, along with some ridiculous slogan about strength through connection. He was everything I wasn't: flashy, charming, constantly shirtless. A picture-perfect wannabe alpha male. The next step was simple. I needed proof. Real proof, not just the screenshots and bank transfers. So, I decided to play detective. I called a private investigator I'd worked with on a construction dispute years ago. His name was Dave, and he was good. I told him everything and hired him on the spot. "You want to know how deep this rabbit hole goes," Dave said. "Don't worry. I'll find out." For the rest of the day, I pretended like nothing was wrong. Cassidy came home, kissed me on the cheek, and asked what I wanted for dinner. I forced a smile and told her pasta sounded great. Inside, I was a ticking time bomb. Dave worked fast. By the next evening, he called with an update. "Ronan," he said, "you were right to be suspicious. Blaine and Cassidy are definitely more than business partners. He laid it out for me. Blaine's gym wasn't just struggling, it was circling the drain. Cassidy had been funneling money into it for months, trying to keep it afloat. But that wasn't all. Dave followed Blaine to a nearby hotel 2 nights before our anniversary. Cassidy met him there, stayed for 2 hours, then left. Hearing it made me sick. The woman I thought I'd spend my life with, sneaking around in cheap hotels with some guy who couldn't even keep his own business afloat? It was humiliating. But Dave wasn't finished. "I've also got something you'll want to see," he said. "They've been using your money to fund more than the gym." "What do you mean?" I asked. "They've been buying things, flights, expensive meals, even a weekend in Aspen last month. All of it paid for through the account Cassidy opened. That money came from you." I could feel the blood drain from my face. She hadn't just betrayed me emotionally, she was literally stealing from me. But it was Dave's next words that really set me off. "And there's one more thing. Blaine hasn't been paying his taxes. Looks like he's been underreporting his income for years. I've got screenshots of the gym's books. He's in deep trouble with the IRS, whether he knows it or not." That's when it clicked. I wasn't just dealing with betrayal. I was dealing with fraud. "Send me everything," I told Dave. "Every receipt, every photo, every record. I want it all." That night, I couldn't look at Cassidy without my stomach turning. She sat on the couch, laughing at some rom-com on Netflix while I pretended to work on my laptop. I kept replaying everything in my head, her messages, the transfers, her trips to Blaine's gym. How long had she been lying to me? Did she even care about what she was doing, or was it all just some game to her? She must have sensed my mood because she asked, "Are you okay? You seem distant." I looked up from my screen and forced a smile. "Just work stress. Nothing to worry about." If only she knew what was coming. Over the next few days, I started putting my plan into motion. First, I met with my lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Karen who handled my firm's contracts. I showed her everything Dave had uncovered. "This is bad," Karen said, scanning the documents. "But it's also good for you. You've got proof, real proof. With this, you could freeze your joint accounts, file for divorce, and even report Blaine for tax fraud." I nodded, already knowing that's exactly what I'd do. But Karen wasn't done. "Ronan, I know this is personal, but you need to think strategically. If you go scorched earth, Cassidy might fight you on the divorce. But if you play it smart, you can get out clean, and make sure she pays for what she's done." I left her office feeling a mix of emotions: anger, heartbreak, determination. Whatever came next, I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't going to let Cassidy and Blaine walk away unscathed. For the rest of the week, I stayed quiet. Cassidy must have thought she was in the clear because she started acting more bold. She spent more time out of the house, coming home late and barely offering excuses. "Just another long day at work," she'd say, with that same fake smile. I'd nod and say nothing, all while keeping track of every move she made. Behind the scenes, I was preparing. I met with Karen again, signed the paperwork to start freezing our accounts, and set up a separate bank account in my name. She made sure I'd have full control of my finances before Cassidy could siphon off another dime. Meanwhile, Dave kept digging. He followed Blaine and Cassidy to their usual spots: a cafe near his gym, a fancy steakhouse downtown, and of course the hotel. Every photo he sent me felt like another stab in the heart. The hardest part was pretending everything was fine. At home, I had to act like the same devoted husband I'd always been. I'd make dinner, ask about her day, and even laugh at her dumb jokes. Inside, though, I was counting down the minutes until I could expose her. Then came Friday. Cassidy told me she was going out with the girls, a phrase that now made my skin crawl. "Don't wait up," she said as she grabbed her coat and kissed me on the cheek. The smell of her perfume lingered in the air long after she left. As soon as she was gone, I grabbed my laptop and logged into our joint bank account. Sure enough, there was a new transfer to Blaine's business account, a cool $5,000. She wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. I stared at the screen, my anger boiling over. But instead of smashing something, I picked up the phone and called Dave. "It's time," I said. The next morning, I put the final pieces of my plan into place. First, I filed the paperwork to freeze our joint accounts. Karen assured me the process would be swift, and Cassidy wouldn't be able to access a single dollar without my approval. Next, I compiled everything Dave had uncovered: photos, financial records, even text messages Cassidy had sent Blaine. I organized it into a neat little folder labeled Evidence and sent copies to Karen, the IRS, and Blaine's business email. By noon, I was ready. All that was left was to confront Cassidy. That evening, Cassidy came home later than usual. She was wearing a dress I hadn't seen before, and her makeup was smudged. Rough night? I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. She shrugged, avoiding eye contact. Just tired. I smiled, standing up from the couch. Good. Because we need to talk. Her face froze. About what? I gestured to the kitchen table, where the folder labeled Evidence sat waiting. About this. Cassidy froze in the doorway, her keys still in her hand. She looked at the folder, then back at me, her face a mix of confusion and unease. What's this? She asked, forcing a small laugh. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. It's everything. Your affair with Blaine. The money you've been stealing. Your plans to leave me and play house with him. All of it. Her face turned pale. She set her keys down slowly, as if trying to stall for time. Ronan, I don't know what you're talking about. Don't, I snapped, my voice sharp enough to cut glass. Don't lie to me, Cassidy. I've seen the messages. I know about the money you've funneled into his failing gym. I know you've been meeting him at hotels. So drop the act. She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like she was searching for the right lie. When she realized there was no escape, her expression shifted, first to shock, then to defiance. Fine, she said, crossing her arms. Yes, I've been seeing Blaine. But it's not what you think. I laughed bitterly. Really? Then what is it? A business partnership? Because I've got photos of you two that say otherwise. She flinched but recovered quickly. You don't understand, Ronan. Blaine needs me. He's been struggling, and I'm helping him get back on his feet. You wouldn't understand because all you care about is your job. My job. I repeated, stunned by her audacity. I work to provide for us. To build a life for us. And you're using my hard-earned money to fund your boyfriend's pipe dream. Do you even hear yourself? She looked away, refusing to meet my eyes. It wasn't supposed to go this far. Go this far. I echoed, my voice rising. Cassidy, you've been lying to me for months. You've stolen from me, humiliated me, and for what? A guy who can't even manage his own business. Her face twisted in anger. You think you're so perfect, Ronan. Always playing the victim. But maybe if you weren't so distant, I wouldn't have needed to look elsewhere. I laughed, the sound bitter and hollow. Oh, so now this is my fault? You cheated on me, Cassidy. You stole from me. Don't you dare try to shift the blame. She opened her mouth to argue, but I held up a hand to stop her. You know what? I'm done talking. Here's what's going to happen. I've frozen our joint accounts. You won't get another penny from me. And as for Blaine, he's about to have a little chat with the IRS. Let's see how well his business survives that. Her eyes widened in panic. You wouldn't. Oh, I would, I said, my voice icy. This ends now, Cassidy. You made your choices, and now you get to live with the consequences. Cassidy spent the night in the guest room. I could hear her pacing, muttering to herself, probably trying to figure out her next move. But it didn't matter. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of control. The cracks she'd caused in my life weren't going to break me. Tomorrow, the fallout would begin. The next morning, Cassidy came downstairs looking disheveled, a shadow of her usual polished self. Her eyes darted toward me, but she didn't say a word. I sat at the kitchen table, calmly drinking my coffee, the same folder from the night before still sitting in front of me. You didn't sleep, I said flatly. She glared at me. What do you expect, Ronan? You've been acting like some kind of dictator, trying to control everything. I chuckled darkly. Control? That's rich, coming from the woman who's been sneaking around, stealing from me to fund her boyfriend's failing dreams. If anyone's been controlling here, it's you. Her face flushed with anger, but she didn't argue. She must have known it was pointless. Instead, she sat down across from me and tried a different tactic. Ronan, she said softly, her voice almost pleading. We can fix this. I made mistakes, big ones, but we can move past this. I still love you. I raised an eyebrow, barely containing my disbelief. Love? Is that what you call it? You've lied to me, cheated on me, stolen from me. That's not love, Cassidy. That's betrayal. She reached out, trying to grab my hand, but I pulled away. I swear, Blaine didn't mean anything, she insisted. It was a mistake. A mistake. I snapped, my calm slipping. A mistake is forgetting our anniversary. This was calculated. You funneled money, planned getaways, met him behind my back. You don't accidentally do that. Her shoulders slumped, and for a moment, I thought she might cry. But then her expression hardened. So what now? You're just going to destroy everything? Throw our marriage away. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. You already destroyed it. I'm just making sure you can't do any more damage. By noon, the fallout had begun in earnest. Cassidy must have checked her accounts because I heard her shouting from the other room. She stormed back into the kitchen, her face red with fury. You froze the accounts? She yelled. Yep, I said calmly. You won't get another dime from me. Not for Blaine, not for anything. She paced back and forth, running her hands through her hair. You're overreacting, Ronan. You can't just cut me off like this. Oh, I can, I replied. And I did. You've taken enough from me. She stared at me, her expression shifting from anger to desperation. What am I supposed to do now? I have bills to pay. Groceries to buy. You should have thought about that before you started stealing from me, I said coldly. That afternoon, things escalated further. Karen called to inform me that Cassidy had tried to access the joint accounts at the bank. When they told her the funds were frozen, she'd apparently caused a scene, demanding to speak to a manager. She's not handling this well, Karen said dryly. No kidding, I muttered. As for Blaine, his day wasn't going much better. Dave sent me a photo of an IRS agent walking into Blaine's gym, a folder tucked under his arm. I imagined Blaine's cocky grin melting away as he realized just how deep in trouble he was. Later that evening, Cassidy's phone buzzed on the counter. She was upstairs, so I glanced at the screen. It was a text from Blaine. What the hell is going on? The IRS just showed up. Did you tell Ronan? I stared at the message, a grim sense of satisfaction washing over me. Blaine was finally getting what he deserved. When Cassidy came downstairs, she looked defeated. You reported him, didn't you? She asked, her voice shaking. I did, I said without hesitation. He's a criminal, Cassidy. And so are you, as far as I'm concerned. She collapsed onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. For the first time, she looked genuinely broken. But I couldn't bring myself to feel sorry for her. She'd made her choices. Now, she was facing the consequences. By the next day, Cassidy had shifted from anger to desperation. She spent the morning pacing the living room, muttering under her breath and fiddling with her phone. Every so often, I'd catch her glancing at me, her eyes filled with something between fear and resentment. Finally, she spoke. Ronan, this has gone far enough. You've made your point. I didn't even look up from my laptop. You think this is about making a point? Cassidy, this is about protecting what's left of my life. You ruined it. Not me. She sank into the chair across from me, tears welling in her eyes. I made mistakes, okay? But you're blowing this out of proportion. That made me snap. I slammed my laptop shut and leaned forward. Blowing it out of proportion? Cassidy, you cheated on me. You stole from me. You used me to bankroll some loser's fantasy gym. And now you want to act like I'm the bad guy for holding you accountable. She flinched at my words but didn't back down. You don't understand, Ronan. Blaine needed me. He was going through a rough time. I laughed bitterly. So you decided to ruin our marriage for him? You betrayed your husband because he needed you? What about what I needed, Cassidy? Did that ever cross your mind? She didn't answer. Instead, she wiped her eyes and whispered, I thought you'd never find out. That was the last straw. I stood up, my hands shaking with anger. And that's supposed to make it better? That you planned to keep me in the dark while you played house with him? Unbelievable. Later that afternoon, Cassidy tried a different approach. She cornered me in the kitchen while I was making coffee. Can we at least talk about this like adults? She asked, her tone softer. I sighed, turning to face her. Fine. Talk. She hesitated, twisting her hands nervously. I don't want to lose everything, Ronan. I know I messed up, but I still care about you. About us. Us. I said, shaking my head. There hasn't been an us for a long time, Cassidy. You made sure of that. She looked down, her voice trembling. I don't want a divorce. I laughed, though there was no humor in it. Too bad. Because that's exactly where this is heading. Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought she might beg. But instead, she squared her shoulders and said, if you divorce me, I'll fight you for everything. The house, the savings, all of it. I stared at her, stunned by her audacity. You're joking. No, she said firmly. I gave 8 years of my life to this marriage. I deserve something. You deserve nothing, I shot back. But go ahead. Fight me. I've got more evidence than you can imagine, and I'm not afraid to use it. By the evening, Cassidy's threats had escalated. She claimed she'd tell our friends and family that I was controlling, that I'd driven her to cheat. She said she'd drag my name through the mud if I didn't back off. I didn't flinch. Go ahead, I said. You think people will believe you after they see the evidence? You'll only embarrass yourself more. She stormed off, slamming the bedroom door behind her. I stayed in the kitchen, sipping my coffee and wondering how I'd ever been blind enough to marry her. Meanwhile, the fallout for Blaine was in full swing. Dave called me that night with an update. Blaine's gym is officially under investigation, he said. The IRS isn't playing around. They've frozen his accounts, and he's already getting calls from creditors. The guy's in freefall. Good, I said. Keep me updated. As the house grew quiet, I found myself staring at a photo of Cassidy and me from our wedding day. She looked so happy, so genuine. I couldn't reconcile that version of her with the person she'd become. But there was no time for nostalgia. This was war, and I wasn't about to lose. The next day, Cassidy barely left the bedroom. I heard her making phone calls, probably to friends, trying to rally sympathy. I could imagine her spinning the story, painting herself as the victim of a controlling husband. It didn't matter. The evidence was all on my side. Meanwhile, I got back to work. My career was something Cassidy couldn't touch, and I wasn't going to let her chaos disrupt what I'd built. At the same time, I was coordinating with Karen to finalize the divorce paperwork. Every document was meticulously prepared, and every angle was covered. The next move was hers. And I was ready. By mid-afternoon, Cassidy emerged, looking disheveled but determined. She sat down across from me at the dining table. I've been thinking, she said. We don't have to destroy each other. We can settle this. Quietly. I raised an eyebrow. Quietly? You mean you want me to let you off the hook without consequences? She frowned. I'm trying to be reasonable, Ronan. We could split things evenly and move on. I couldn't help but laugh. Split things evenly? Cassidy, you've already taken more than your share, behind my back. Why would I agree to that? Her jaw tightened. If you push this, it'll get ugly. For both of us. I leaned forward, staring her down. It's already ugly, Cassidy. And I'm not the one who made it that way. By evening, Cassidy had retreated again, and I finally had a moment to breathe. I checked my emails and found one from Dave with an update on Blaine. Apparently, Blaine had tried to withdraw money from one of his accounts, only to find it frozen. He'd also been hit with a formal notice of investigation from the IRS. Looks like your friend is having a rough week, Dave wrote, attaching a photo of Blaine storming out of the gym, his face twisted in anger. Good. That night, Cassidy tried another tactic. She came downstairs in her pajamas, her eyes red from crying. Ronan, she said softly, do you ever think about how we got here? How we went from being so in love to this? Her words caught me off guard. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Every day, I said. And every day, I wonder why you threw it all away. She sat down beside me, her voice trembling. I don't know. I guess. I felt like you didn't see me anymore. Like I was just a part of your routine. I shook my head, unable to believe what I was hearing. So instead of talking to me, you ran to Blaine? You stole from me? That's how you fix things. She started to cry again. I know I messed up. But I never stopped loving you. I stood up, unable to listen anymore. Stop saying that. You don't destroy someone you love. You don't lie to them, cheat on them, steal from them. Whatever you felt for me, it wasn't love. She didn't follow me as I walked upstairs, and for the first time in weeks, I slept soundly. The next morning, the cracks in Cassidy's carefully constructed facade started to show. She was glued to her phone, pacing the kitchen and whispering angrily into it. I didn't have to guess who she was talking to, it had to be Blaine. When she finally hung up, she spun around to face me. "Did you report Blaine to the IRS?" she demanded, her voice shaking with anger. I leaned back in my chair, calmly sipping my coffee. What if I did? You think I'm going to sit back and let you two destroy everything I've worked for? Her face flushed, and for a moment, she looked like she might throw something. But then her shoulders slumped, and she sat down across from me. "He's losing everything, Ronan. The gym, his accounts. Everything. That's what happens when you play dirty," I said coldly. "He should have thought about that before he got involved with a married woman and started laundering money." Her eyes narrowed. "It wasn't laundering. I was helping him." "Helping him?" I scoffed. "Cassidy, you were stealing from me to keep his sinking ship afloat. That's not help, that's theft." She opened her mouth to argue but stopped herself. Instead, she buried her face in her hands, her voice muffled. "I didn't want it to end like this." "Well, it did," I said. "And now you get to live with the fallout." As the day went on, Cassidy's world began to unravel further. Karen called me with an update. The divorce papers were ready, and the financial freeze was rock solid. Cassidy couldn't access a single account without my approval, and since I'd already moved my personal savings to a separate account, she was effectively broke. By mid-afternoon, Cassidy finally cracked. She threw her phone down on the counter and screamed, "I can't believe you're doing this to me." I looked up from my laptop, unfazed. "Doing this to you? Cassidy, you did this to yourself." Her eyes filled with tears, but there was a flash of anger behind them. "You're enjoying this, aren't you? Watching me suffer." "Enjoying it?" I said, standing up. "No, Cassidy. I'm not enjoying this. But I'm not going to feel sorry for you, either. You made your choices, and now you're facing the consequences." That evening, Dave sent me another update on Blaine. His gym had officially shut down, and he'd been evicted from his apartment. Apparently, the IRS had uncovered years of financial discrepancies, and creditors were circling like vultures. When I read the email, I felt a grim sense of satisfaction. Blaine had thought he could steal from me, lie to me, and walk away unscathed. He was wrong. By the time Cassidy went to bed, she was a shell of her former self. She barely said a word as she trudged up the stairs, her shoulders slumped and her head down. I almost felt a pang of sympathy for her, almost. But then I remembered everything she'd done, and any sympathy evaporated. The next morning, Cassidy was up early, uncharacteristically dressed and ready to leave. She stood by the front door, keys in hand, her face set with determination. "I'm going to talk to Blaine," she announced, her tone defiant. I set my coffee mug down deliberately. "Why?" "So you can compare notes on how badly you've both screwed up your lives." Her jaw tightened. "You don't understand, Ronan. He's in trouble because of you. I need to help him." I laughed bitterly, standing up to face her. "Help him? Cassidy, he's done. His gym is gone, his accounts are frozen, and he's probably going to face charges. The only thing you'll accomplish by going to him is sinking even lower." She hesitated, the fire in her eyes flickering. "You can't stop me." "I won't," I said calmly. "But you should know that if you walk out that door to see him, you're proving exactly what I already know. You care more about him than you ever did about me." Her face fell, and for a moment, I thought she might back down. But then she squared her shoulders and left, slamming the door behind her. For the next few hours, I waited. I wasn't sure what Cassidy hoped to achieve by running to Blaine, but I knew it wouldn't end well. Sure enough, by mid-afternoon, she came home, her face pale and her eyes rimmed red. She walked into the living room, dropped her purse on the floor, and collapsed onto the couch. "Well?" I asked, not bothering to hide the edge in my voice. She looked at me, tears streaming down her face. "He's leaving. He said there's nothing left for him here." "Smart move," I said. "Too bad you didn't think of it sooner." Her lip trembled, and for a moment, I thought she might lash out. But instead she whispered, He said I was a mistake." That stopped me in my tracks. As much as I despised Blaine, I hadn't expected him to throw Cassidy under the bus so quickly. A mistake. I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. Cassidy, he used you. He took your money, ruined your marriage, and now he's running because he doesn't want to deal with the consequences. She buried her face in her hands, her sobs muffled. I don't know what to do, she cried. I've lost everything. I leaned against the doorway, my arms crossed. You did this, Cassidy. You chose him over me, over us. And now you're seeing exactly what that choice cost you. For the rest of the day, Cassidy stayed holed up in the guest room. I didn't bother checking on her. I was done trying to make sense of her actions or feeling any sort of pity for her. Instead, I finalized the next steps with Karen. The divorce filing was set to go through the following week, and I was confident that Cassidy wouldn't get much, if anything, once the court saw the evidence. That evening, Cassidy finally emerged. She sat across from me at the dining table, her eyes swollen from crying. Can we start over?" she asked quietly. I stared at her, shocked by the audacity of her question. Start over? Cassidy, you destroyed our marriage. There's no starting over from that. She nodded slowly, her shoulders sagging. I don't know how to fix this. You can't, I said simply. And honestly, I don't think you ever wanted to. The days that followed were a slow, painful unraveling for Cassidy. The bravado, the anger, even the defiance, it all disappeared. What was left was a hollow version of the woman I once thought I'd spend my life with. I went about my routines, focused on work and the final pieces of the divorce process. Cassidy, meanwhile, stayed mostly in the guest room, venturing out only for the bare essentials. She was quiet, distant, almost ghost-like, but I didn't let it distract me. I had too much at stake to let her emotions sway me now. On Friday, Karen called with good news. The divorce petition is officially filed. She'll be served early next week, she said. Perfect, I replied. What's the next step? She can contest it, but honestly, with the evidence we have, she'd be fighting a losing battle. The financial side is locked down. All that's left is formalizing asset division, which, given her actions, will heavily favor you. Hearing that felt like a weight lifting off my shoulders. For the first time since this nightmare began, I could see a clear path forward. That evening, Cassidy tried one last desperate move. I came home from work to find her sitting at the dining table, a glass of wine in her hand and an envelope in front of her. Ronan, she said as I walked in, we need to talk. I set my bag down and crossed my arms. About what? She slid the envelope toward me. It's everything. Texts, receipts, bank transfers. I'm giving it to you because I want to make things right. I stared at the envelope but didn't touch it. Why now? I asked. Why suddenly decide to come clean? She looked down, twisting the stem of her wine glass nervously. Because I've lost everything, and I can't stand the thought of losing you too. I laughed, a short, bitter sound. Cassidy, you lost me the moment you decided Blaine was worth more than our marriage. Her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, I thought she might argue. But instead she whispered, I know. I thought maybe if I was honest, you'd give me another chance. I picked up the envelope and stared at it for a moment before setting it back down. Honesty now doesn't erase the lies, the betrayal. If you really wanted to make things right, you'd have come clean before I had to dig up the truth myself. She nodded slowly, her tears spilling over. So, that's it? We're done. I met her gaze, my voice steady. We've been done for a long time, Cassidy. You just didn't want to admit it. That night, as Cassidy cried herself to sleep in the guest room, I finally felt a sense of closure. The damage was done, but at least now I was free to rebuild. With the divorce in motion and the worst of the storm behind me, I shifted my focus to rebuilding my life. It wasn't easy. Cassidy's betrayal had left deep scars, but I refused to let her actions define me or my future. The first step was reclaiming my space. I packed Cassidy's things into boxes and moved them into the guest room. It wasn't spiteful, it was practical. She no longer had a claim to the life we'd built together, and I needed a clean slate. When she saw the boxes, she didn't say much. Just a quiet, I get it. At work, I threw myself into my projects. I'd always been meticulous in my career, and now that attention to detail became my escape. Naomi, a colleague I'd worked with on several major projects, noticed the shift. You're working like a man possessed, she said one afternoon, leaning against my office door. Just keeping busy, I replied, forcing a smile. Naomi raised an eyebrow. Busy's good, but don't forget to take a breather. Burnout's real, Ronan. Her concern was genuine, and I appreciated it more than I could say. Naomi had always been sharp, supportive, and honest, a refreshing contrast to the chaos I'd been living through. Meanwhile, Cassidy's unraveling continued. She'd stop me in the hallway with teary-eyed apologies, rambling about how much she regretted everything. "Ronan, please," she said one night, blocking my path to the kitchen. "I'm sorry for what I did. I'll do anything to fix this." "You can't fix it, Cassidy," I replied, stepping around her. "You made your choices. Now you have to live with them." Her desperation was palpable, but it wasn't enough to undo the damage. 2 weeks later, Cassidy was served with the divorce papers. The moment she saw the envelope, she froze. "So, it's official," she said quietly, staring at the documents. "Yes," I said. "It is." She didn't argue or cry this time. She just nodded and walked away, the papers clutched tightly in her hands. That same evening, Naomi stopped by my office again, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you could use this," she said, setting one on my desk. "Thanks," I said, genuinely grateful. Naomi hesitated, then asked, "How are you holding up? And don't give me the 'I'm fine' routine. I can see through that." I sighed, leaning back in my chair. "It's been a lot. But I'm getting through it." She nodded, her expression thoughtful. "If you ever need to talk, or just grab a drink, you know where to find me." Her offer was simple, but it meant more than she probably realized. That night, as I sat in my now quiet home, I felt the faint stirrings of hope. The life I'd built with Cassidy was over, but that didn't mean my life was. Over the next few weeks, things began to settle. Cassidy's presence in the house became less noticeable. She avoided me most of the time, staying in the guest room or leaving the house entirely. I assumed she was staying with friends or finding ways to deal with her new reality. I didn't ask. Meanwhile, I focused on moving forward. Part of that meant rethinking what I wanted for my future. My career was stable, my financial situation secure, but emotionally, I was still rebuilding. One Friday evening, Naomi invited me out for drinks with some coworkers. Normally, I decline. Socializing wasn't high on my list these days, but something about the way she smiled and said, "It'll be good for you," convinced me to go. We met at a small brewery downtown, the kind of place I'd normally enjoy but hadn't visited in ages. Naomi was already there when I arrived, chatting with a couple of our colleagues. "Ronan," she called, waving me over. I joined them, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I let myself relax. The conversation flowed easily, and Naomi's quick wit kept me laughing. She had a way of making even the heaviest topics feel light, and for a few hours, I forgot about Cassidy, Blaine, and everything that had gone wrong. As the night wound down, Naomi and I found ourselves alone at the bar. Our coworkers had left one by one, leaving us to finish our drinks in a companionable silence. "Thanks for dragging me out tonight," I said, breaking the quiet. She smiled, her eyes warm. "You looked like you needed it." "I did," I admitted. Naomi hesitated, then said, "You know, Ronan, you're stronger than you think. Most people would fall apart after what you've been through, but you're handling it. And that's impressive." Her words caught me off guard. "I don't know if I'd call this handling it," I said with a small laugh. "You're here, aren't you?" she countered. "That counts for something." For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't expected: connection. Back at home, I couldn't stop thinking about our conversation. Naomi was different from anyone I'd ever known, grounded, kind, and fiercely intelligent. She'd been a rock for me without even realizing it. The day Cassidy moved out felt surreal. She didn't tell me her plans ahead of time, just started packing while I was at work. When I came home, I found her standing in the hallway with her suitcases and a stack of boxes by the door. She looked at me, her expression unreadable. "I'm leaving," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, keeping my face neutral. "Good." For a moment, she hesitated, as if waiting for me to say something else. When I didn't, she let out a shaky breath and picked up her bags. "I know you don't believe me," she said, pausing at the door. "But I really am sorry. For everything." I looked at her, feeling nothing but exhaustion. "Cassidy, sorry doesn't fix this. It doesn't fix anything." She nodded slowly, tears welling in her eyes. "Goodbye, Ronan. Goodbye." And just like that, she was gone. I spent the rest of the evening clearing out the remnants of her presents. Empty drawers, photos, even the perfume bottle she'd left on the bathroom counter. It was cathartic, like shedding a layer of old skin. By the time I finished, the house felt lighter, like it was truly mine again. The next day, Naomi stopped by my office with a cup of coffee and her usual warm smile. "You look different today," she said, setting the coffee on my desk. "Different how?" "Lighter," she said, tilting her head as she studied me. "Like a weight's been lifted." I smiled, surprised by how accurate her observation was. "It has." She didn't press for details, just gave me an encouraging nod before heading back to her desk. But her words stayed with me, a reminder that I was finally free to start over. Later that week, I received a notification from my lawyer. Cassidy had agreed to the divorce terms. There would be no drawn-out court battle, no ugly fights over assets. She had nothing left to leverage, and I wasn't offering any second chances. It was official, I was moving on. With Cassidy officially out of my life, the sense of finality was both sobering and liberating. The chapter was closed. I could finally focus on rebuilding, not just my life but also my sense of trust and self-worth. A few weeks after Cassidy moved out, Naomi invited me to an art exhibit downtown. It wasn't something I'd normally do, but when she asked, I found myself saying yes without hesitation. The gallery was packed, filled with conversations that echoed off the walls. Naomi looked effortlessly at ease, her confidence drawing people toward her like a magnet. I admired that about her, how she made everything seem so natural. "You hate this, don't you?" she teased, nudging me as we wandered through the exhibit. "I don't hate it," I said, chuckling. "I just don't get it. Why would someone pay thousands of dollars for a painting of a blue square?" She laughed, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "It's not about the square, Ronan. It's about what it represents." "And what's that?" She smirked, tilting her head in mock seriousness. "Possibilities." I rolled my eyes playfully, but her words stuck with me. After the exhibit, we grabbed dinner at a small Italian restaurant a few blocks away. The conversation flowed easily, moving from work to favorite movies to childhood memories. It wasn't a date, at least not officially, but it felt like one. As we walked back to our cars, Naomi turned to me, her expression soft. "You know, you're a lot more interesting than you let on." "Is that a compliment?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Maybe," she said with a grin. That night, as I sat in my now empty house, I thought about Naomi and the way she'd made me laugh, the way she'd listened without judgment. For the first time in months, I felt a spark of something I hadn't dared to feel, hope. In the weeks that followed, Naomi and I grew closer. We started grabbing lunch together, texting after work, and sharing little parts of our lives that we hadn't shared with anyone else. It was slow, cautious, but it felt real. One evening, after a particularly long day, Naomi surprised me with a visit. She brought takeout and insisted we watch a classic movie she swore I'd love.